Have you ever noticed what most people do the moment nothing is happening? A line forms, an elevator takes too long, a coffee hasn't arrived yet, and the hand reaches for the phone, almost automatically. Even 5 seconds of waiting gets filled, not because there's something urgent to see, but because emptiness feels strangely loud. And then there are people who don't do that. They can sit still for a long time, not frozen, not performing calmness, just not needing to escape the pause. While everyone else is scrolling, tapping, refreshing, they stay where they are, as if the moment doesn't require entertainment to be tolerable. You've probably seen it in a small scene that looks like nothing. A cafe table, the kind with lights spilling across the surface, a spoon tapping lightly against a glass somewhere behind them. They're waiting, but their phone stays face down, or stays in a pocket, like an object that doesn't have to be touched every minute to prove you're alive. They look out the window, not searching for anything dramatic, just letting the street move. From the outside, this can look like confidence, or even detachment. People assume they must be unusually disciplined, or maybe they're doing some quiet form of meditation, but psychology suggests something simpler may be happening beneath it. For many people, stillness triggers a tiny internal alarm. Not panic, not fear, just a restless sensation that says, do something. It can show up as a twitchy urge to check notifications, to open an app without thinking, to fill the gap before the gap starts feeling like a question. Research on attention and cognitive switching shows how quickly the brain learns to treat interruption as relief, and how easily relief becomes habit. The people who can sit still often notice that habit from the inside. They feel the urge, but they don't immediately obey it. The phone lights up, the screen glows for a second, and they let it dim again without grabbing it back, like they're letting a wave pass instead of jumping every time the water moves. It's not that they don't care what's happening, they just don't treat every moment of silence as a problem to solve. There's a particular kind of memory this brings up in people who aren't used to it. Standing in an elevator with strangers, the small discomforts of having nothing to do with your face, sitting in a car before you start driving, that empty minute where the engine hums and your hands don't know where to go, waiting for a reply you can already see in your mind, and feeling that almost embarrassing urge to check again, even though nothing could have changed in the last 15 seconds. Some people learned slowly that the urge itself is not an emergency. Psychologists often talk about distress tolerance, the ability to stay with an uncomfortable internal sensation without reacting instantly. In everyday life, this doesn't look heroic. It looks like someone waiting without reaching for a distraction. It looks like someone allowing boredom, awkwardness, or emptiness to exist without trying to anesthetize it. And it's important to notice what this isn't. It isn't laziness. It isn't numbness. It isn't someone who feels nothing. If anything, many people like this feel more. They just don't confuse feeling with reacting. The moment passes through them without forcing them to move. Sometimes this ability forms because life taught them that constant stimulation doesn't actually soothe, it only postpones. Sometimes it forms because they grew up with more empty time and learned it wasn't dangerous. Sometimes it comes from exhaustion, the kind where the nervous system finally stops sprinting and starts choosing fewer inputs. But whatever the path, the result looks the same. They can be with the moment as it is without immediately turning away. You can see it in social settings too. After a conversation ends, they don't rush to add one more sentence to smooth the silence. They let the pause hang for a second, and somehow it doesn't embarrass them. They don't chase the perfect ending. They don't patch every gap with noise. They trust that connection doesn't collapse just because no one is speaking for a moment. In a culture that treats constant engagement as normal, this can feel almost unfamiliar. We've been trained to believe that if we're not consuming something, we're wasting time. But the person who can sit still seems to be living by a different rule. The present moment doesn't need to be improved in order to be lived. And if you're listening to this and feeling a quiet reaction, it might not be about them at all. It might be about what happens inside you when nothing is happening? Do you reach for a screen to quiet yourself? Do you fill the space before you even notice it? Or can you sit with it long enough to hear what the silence was carrying all along? Because maybe the question isn't whether sitting still is a skill. Maybe the question is what you've been using motion to avoid, and what might return to you if you stayed with the pause for just a few seconds longer. Thank you for staying until the end. Your presence is the reason these stories get to be told. If this resonated with you, feel free to share your thoughts and support the person you don't show by subscribing. See you again.